Morning, everybody. Good to be worshiping with you guys on this beautiful fall Sunday morning. And those of you who are gathered here, great to be worshiping with you. For those of you who are worshiping with us online, great to be worshiping with you as well. As Heather just said, we are closing out this 4-week-long series that we've been calling A Long Way From Home. And in this series, we have looked at the story of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel so far. And all three of these stories had at least 4 things in common. All these men of God had a similar experience. They were all a long way from home. They all experienced times where it felt like God was silent. And they all stayed faithful to God. And the 4th thing that they all shared in common was that God showed himself faithful. God showed himself faithful. The same will be true of the story I want to share with you today. The story of Queen Esther. Now, the name Esther does not mean woman of great faith, but I think it should. Every Esther I know was a woman of great faith. My mother-in-law's name was Esther. My wife's middle name is Esther. We've had at least 2 women here that I know whose faith was profound. So I just think that the name Esther ought to mean woman of great faith. And that's certainly true of Queen Esther. So, as Queen Esther, and I'm not going to be able to go through this entire story. There's lots of wonderful twists and turns and a story of intrigue and so forth. So I'm just going to be looking at a piece of it. But just to give you an idea, Esther is young. She's beautiful. She is now transcendently wealthy, and she is married to the most powerful man in the world, King Xerxes. But the thing about her that is enduring, her legacy, is that she put her life on the line for the sake of others. Nothing else endured. Her youth, her beauty, her wealth, even the nation that she served, all faded away. But the enduring legacy of Esther was that she trusted God for the sake of others. So again, some background, a little back story here to the story of Esther. Esther was, as I said, she was married to King Xerxes, who was the king of Persia. This took place in about 470 BC, so about 70 years later than the story of Daniel that we looked at last week. Esther's mom died when she was a girl, and so she was raised by a cousin of hers named Mordecai. Mordecai was a faithful Jewish man who had a deep and abiding faith in God. The king didn't know that she was Jewish. If he had known that, he never would have married her. And there's one other central character in this story of Esther, and it's a guy named Haman. So Haman was a power-hungry narcissist, driven by arrogance, ego, and intolerance. And those were some of his better qualities. He was also a massive manipulator. And Haman developed a deep hatred for Mordecai. He didn't know that Mordecai and Esther were related. The reason that he ended up hating Mordecai was because Mordecai refused to bow down to him when he would pass by on the streets of the palace court. Mordecai wasn't refusing to bow down to Haman out of some disrespect and, that kind of thing. It was that Mordecai, like I said, he was a man of deep faith, and he believed that to bow to one in authority like that would be to disobey the commandment that you had to have no other gods before the one true God, Yahweh. And so he would bow to no man, he would bow only to God. But Haman, being who he was, a self-centered egomaniac, narcissist kind of guy, took it as a personal affront. And he hated Mordecai to the point that he wanted to figure out a way to not only kill Mordecai, but to kill every Jew in Persia. And so he came up with a plan. And being the master manipulator that he was able to convince the king to sign off on his plan. See, he went to the king and he said, hey, we have a problem in the kingdom. All of these Jewish people that are in our kingdom are a threat to the unity of the kingdom because they have different customs as Jewish people than we do. They're a threat to our unity because they have different customs than we do. And so he convinced Xerxes that every man, woman, and child that was Jewish should all be killed in a single day. And because what was really behind this was his own ego, he had a special gallows built for Mordecai that he was going to be hung from. This guy's dark, right? This Haman is dark. Here's where the story takes a turn, right? So all of this is now underway. Word leaks out across the kingdom about what's going to happen. And of course, the Jewish people are terrified, they're frightened, they're heartbroken, they're trembling. Mordecai is beyond grief-stricken. He goes outside of the palace gates, tears his clothes, and cries out to God in deep grief. Now, Esther has no idea what's going on, but she hears that her cousin Mordecai is in deep grief, and she wonders why. So she sends a member of her staff out to find him to ask what's going on. So he sends word back to Esther about what's going on with this caveat: why don't you go to King Xerxes and plead on our behalf? Esther sends back word to Mordecai. There's a problem with that plan. The king has ordered that if anyone ever comes into his presence that wasn't invited, they're to be executed. All right? That's a serious policy of you have to have an appointment, right? The only way that you survive that is if the king looks at you as you approach, points his royal golden sepulcher in your direction, and at that point, you are then welcomed. So that's the problem. So Mordecai, in response to that message, sends the following message, and it's found in Esther chapter 4, 13 and 14. This is what it says. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you are in the palace, you will escape what all other Jews are killed. When all other Jews are killed, you keep quiet. You know what? I'm going to start that over again because that was a really bad reading right there. He said, don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. You keep quiet at a time like this. That deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. So in this response, Mordecai wants Esther to look at this situation through two lenses, if you will, through two perspectives, all right? First, he wants her to identify with those lives that are in danger. This, he's saying, could be you. Pastor Rick, in a message in this series a few weeks ago, in talking about the story of Ezekiel, said this: proximity to pain is personal. Proximity to pain is personal. In other words, it's easy to ignore the suffering of them, of they, of those people, right? But when it's your family, when it's your friends, when it's your neighbor, the suffering, the pain becomes personal, right? Mordecai wants Esther to take this situation personally. It's not about they, them, those people. It's about us, your people, your family, your friends. This is your purpose. And then he goes on and says, and you know what, Esther? Who knows? Maybe everything in your life has brought you to this moment. The fact that you were an orphan, the fact that you lived with me, the unlikely circumstances that brought you into the role that you were in, maybe all of that was part of God's design to put you in this place for this purpose. Your whole life was about this moment. And that's a lot for anybody to take in. And I'm thinking it was a lot for this young woman, especially given how high the stakes were going to be. But here's how she responded to Haman. See if I get this any better. This is Esther chapter 4, 15 and 16. It says this: Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: Go and gather together all of the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. See what she's doing there? She's identifying with the people. She's putting herself in proximity with them. They are going to have this shared experience together. It's no longer they, them, those people. It's us together. Proximity. Goes on. And then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. If I must die, I must die. And I get chills every time I read that section of Esther. Such a courageous statement. This is the moment I believe that Esther was transformed from a casual queen to a warrior for justice and righteousness. For persecuted people, for her people. She's willing to put it all on the line for the sake of others. She doesn't know what's going to happen. She doesn't know how it's going to go. But she has come to the understanding that this is what her life is about. This is her calling. But I don't want to miss what she said first, right? She says, we're going to fast for 3 days. Not just no food, but no drink. For 3 days. Seeking God. The discipline of fasting is intended to be accompanied by intense prayer and seeking God. So it's not just about denial of food, it's about spending that time in intense prayer, listening for, talking to, waiting on God. Man, I am with Esther on this one. Like, before I'm going to take a step that's going to possibly cost me something, probably not my life, but cost me something, I want to know that God is in it with me, and God will be there for me. I'm sure that a number of you recognize the name Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was an anti-corruption activist in Russia who pointed out the corruption in Putin and in the people around him, the corruption against the Russian people, his political corruption and so forth. And he would do the research and investigate what was going on and report it to people. And it got him imprisoned a lot. And in 2020, he was poisoned, almost died, was flown to a hospital in Germany where he recovered, physically recovered his strength. And as soon as he was back to full strength, he went immediately back to Russia, where he was arrested, went through a sham trial, convicted, and received a long sentence and sent to prison in Siberia. You may know the story. What I didn't know about Alexei Navalny was that he is a Christian. A friend of mine sent me excerpts from an article from the New Yorker that just came out about Alexei Navalny. And he kept a journal while he was in prison. And in this article, there were excerpts from the journal that he kept. And I want to read to you a couple of excerpts from his journal. He wrote this: "You lie in your bunk, looking at the one above, and ask yourself whether you are a Christian in your heart of hearts. Are you a disciple of the religion whose founder sacrificed himself for others, paying the price for their sins? Do you believe in the immortality of the soul and the rest of that cool stuff? If you can honestly answer yes, what is there left for you to worry about? My job is to seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness." There's more from that article, but that gives you a flavor of who he was, of what drove him, of while he was willing to literally say, "And if I die, I die." There's another man who said a similar thing in his time and in his day. It's the Apostle Paul. This is what Paul said, and it's recorded in Acts chapter 20, verse 24. "But my life is worth nothing to me unless I use it for finishing the work assigned me by the Lord Jesus. The work of telling others the good news about the wonderful grace of God." Paul got it. Alexei Navalny got it. And so did Esther and Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah. They all got it. They all found themselves a long way from home, but they all remembered who they were because they knew the God who loved them, the God who was there for them, the God who is always faithful. And they trusted in him, so they never forgot who they were. And because of that, they were willing to lay down all that they had at the feet of God and live lives of service to others. Jesus said of himself, "I did not come into the world to be served, but to serve others and to give my life as a sacrifice." So the band is going to come up and they're going to lead us in a song called "Crowns Down." "I will lay my crowns down at your feet, for you are worthy, so worthy, God. I will give my life as an offering, for you are holy." Our crowns, obviously we're not wearing crowns these days, our crowns represent those things that are most valuable to us in our lives. Our time, our talents, our agendas, our resources. Who are the ones that God is calling you to serve today? As a congregation, as a church, we have said, you know what, we align ourselves with, we come alongside food insecure in our region. So we have this pantry where we get to serve folks who are in that situation in their lives. There are those in our church who have said, you know what, I feel called to come alongside kids in the city of Camden, and they give of their time and their talents to work with kids in Camden. We have worked with children in Haiti. We have served folks in Cuba. There's a group in our church right now that is committed to ending the sin of racism. And so they are educating themselves and they are finding ways to come against the sin of discriminating against people because of their race and inviting all to participate in that as well. Who is it for you? Who is God calling you to serve? Who do you need to bring your crown before God on behalf? Say, Lord, I'm willing to give my life to serve you by serving this group of people, these individuals, people who I identify with? Who is it for you? Let's continue to worship.